Okay, so next we're going to talk about game day nutrition. So all of us as coaches work with teams. So we're going to talk specifically about, say, as a S&C coach, how and what advice you give to players before a game, what you give them during a game, and then what's the advice for after a game for them. So thankfully we've got our nutritionist here to give us a good hand today. He's going to guide us through the whole thing, and then we'll give some practical examples of what we do and how we work with our teams as it is. So Shane, do you want to start? We'll start before a game and then we'll go into it, and then after the game.
So sorry, are we just talking about literally the hour before the game or the day of the game, or what are we talking
We'll go day of the game.
Okay.
So morning you get up, say lunchtime kick-off now.
Okay.
2:30 kick-off.
Perfect. Yeah, cool. I was going to say it very much depends on what time you're going to be playing the game, because obviously if you're first thing 10 a.m. in the morning or something, you're going to obviously have to start that a little bit the day before. Okay, we'll say it's rugby just for ease at the moment, because obviously game day nutrition is going to vary very much depending on the sport. I'll explain obviously where you differ it for rugby and where you differ from different things, but rugby is going to be our table sport for the moment. So the main thing you're looking at before the game is going to be carbohydrates. So you've all probably heard the term carb loading before. So carb loading is essentially where you want to build up your glycogen stores. So basically a store of energy you're going to have in your body. So you have essentially a full tank of fuel before you go out on that pitch. So you want to make sure that you're leaving nothing, every ounce of energy you can store in your body you have before you set foot on that pitch. So obviously the simplest thing, that means you'll tire less, or you'll tire later on in the game. That make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So again, how you're going to do that is you want to make sure that you're eating an awful lot of carbohydrates before the match actually starts. So glycogen, when you eat a carbohydrate, your body breaks that carbohydrate down into glucose, and you can use that glucose either for energy straight away, or you can store it in the body as glycogen to use as fuel later on. So when you're going to be dealing with, for rugby players, carb loading can vary quite a lot. So you're usually looking at this is where stay at the day before. So carb loading is obviously going to start in the kind of 24 hours before you start game day. Does that make sense?
24 hours?
Yeah, so we're starting day before here. So day before, you're going to be looking at getting anywhere from kind of 6 to 10 grams per kilogram body weight in. So obviously there's an element of trial and error with this for players. So again, people have different reactions to that volume of food. So again, if you're not used to it, you wouldn't start a player.
For easy math here, so if we're dealing with a 100 kilo man, so we're talking about 6 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight?
Yeah.
So what does 600 to 1,000 grams of carbohydrates look like? Be very, very descriptive here, Shane, please.
A lot. Be very descriptive because you're just bringing it on me right now. But so again, you want to start, it's going to be looking at quite heavy carbohydrates, so kind of quite low GI foods. You'll be doing a lot of oats, a lot of kind of higher fiber things. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
It's going to be a lot of you'll be things like pasta, things like potatoes, things like oats. You're going to be very much focused on your carbohydrate sources.
Pasta has gluten in it.
It's great.
Okay, so just go through. So oats. So all of your carbohydrates, like your potatoes, oats, some fruit and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But if someone wanted to try and visualize exactly how much carbohydrate should be eating in terms of meals, what's that, like 3 or 4 meals, all with a third of protein?
Yeah, so I'd nearly probably add, a good way to do it for carb loading is I usually get athletes to just add an extra meal to what they would have the day before. So if you have like quite a carb heavy meal, and I'll be like, okay, well every Friday before your Saturday game, you just add that in between dinner before you go to bed, or between lunch and dinner. It's just an extra meal that's quite heavy carb dominated. So it means because again, for an athlete, you want to try and limit the changes that you have to make while eliciting the response you need. So again, if I were to come through and say, okay, well, you usually eat 5 meals a day, here's 6 completely different meals a day that'll hit your goals. Whereas if I can say, continue with your normal 5 meals a day, just add this one in, it's much more likely that the athlete's going to do that.
Okay, so they need to be adding in an extra meal in and around the evening.
Their food volume is definitely going to increase, so it's the easiest way to attack that. Again, everyone's different. Some people might like to change up everything, but the easiest way is probably just to add in an extra carb heavy meal.
Okay.
Or increase the amount of carbs coming through.
Okay, then when we go back to the morning of it, so if we're kicking off at 2:30, I'm going to eat early in the morning. How far before the game?
So about first meal, I'd say about 4 to 5 hours beforehand, and you want things that are quite easy to digest. So usually things like pancakes are a good option for kind of the morning of. Pancakes, waffles, things like that. Even sometimes cereals, even some of the higher sugary cereals, just because they're very easy to digest and they're quite low food volume and quite high carbohydrates. You don't want things that are going to be very hard to digest. So you'd be limiting fiber, limiting things like vegetables, just because they're so hard to digest, and you don't want to be digesting stuff as you go out onto the pitch.
Cool. I don't think many lads eat vegetables at 9:30 in the morning. Before a match anyway.
Some of them exclusively will not eat vegetables for the rest of the week until 9:30 in the morning of, and then they'll
just to spite you, they won't eat it for the rest of the week. Okay, so that's what we're having in the morning. So we're probably talking about.
So sorry, did we give examples of what we could be eating?
Yeah, things like pancakes, things like waffles, cereals. That's kind of the stuff you want to be gearing towards. Things like fruits as well.
All glutinous foods.
All gluten, yeah.
Shane has a problem with gluten. If anyone hasn't noticed. So then, okay, we'll ignore that and we'll leave Shane out there for a minute. You can talk about that later, maybe. So that's like 5 hours before. Then, say we've gone to the match for about an hour and a half before, maybe 2 hours before. So you may be just about to go to the venue, or if it's an away match, you might be on the bus. Mm-hmm. Does everyone need to eat? Because I know some people do and some people don't, like eating, say, an hour or two before or just before they go do the warm-up. Do they need to still get nutrition? And if they don't like eating at that point, is that okay?
They don't have to. So I'd like them to have something small, even if it's just like a banana or some fruit, but they don't have to. Like, again, 90% of the work is done before, when you're carb loading the day before, and the main meal in the morning of. And at this time, you find a lot of players are quite superstitious. There's things they've been doing since they were 10, 11, 12, and they don't deviate from them. So a lot of the time, it's not a very scientific approach, but a lot of time you can do more damage changing their weird superstitious routine than you can by actually implementing getting a tiny bit more carbohydrates into them. Does that make sense? So you'll throw them off mentally if they're going to the pitch and they're like, oh, I didn't run around in circles 3 times to change my socks. I'm not going to be able to perform.
Well, lucky socks are important, Shane.
Yeah. There we go. Prime example over here. But I would ideally like them to get something in, just to, again, top up that reserve.
Cool. So eating before, do you have something there?
In terms of the hour before, the lead up to the game?
Yeah, again, something small and easy to digest if they do want to. At that stage, they don't have to at all. So some people, like, they'll be kind of like, that'll be close enough to when they're going out to warm up and stuff, and some people just like to have a completely empty stomach.
So talking about like being superstitious, when I played, I had to be like, I had to eat before 2 hours of playing, and then like within the hour leading up, I would be consuming gels and banana and stuff like that. And it probably was counterproductive because it's not ideal running around the stomach, like having all the blood going to your stomach and trying to digest that food. But like I had this mental block where it's like, I'm going to run out of energy. I'm going to run out of energy. And what am I going to do when I run out of energy? And plus I was like, if I was also slightly hypoglycemic, where I would like get these like sugar lows, and it would happen to me at training, and it would happen to me when I do loads and loads of training. And I would, I always remember like making sure the physio had those carbohydrate gels in their bag all of the time, their medical bag. So yeah, it just for myself, it was like, it was more of an obsession trying to make sure that I had loads and loads and loads of glycogen in my system pre-game.
Yeah, but again, there is like, that's a huge element, especially in rugby. Like, you'll see kickers that have to be out at this time to do things. You have to walk over to them with your tea in your left hand to bring them the tea. Like, little stuff like that, but it makes a big difference to performance. Like, you can't scientifically quantify it, but it has very much an effect on the player that you shouldn't. Not that you shouldn't change it, but it's pre-season is the time to try and address, okay, you meet me halfway here and do this and I'll still leave you through it. And then we can trial it for a few pre-season games. But what happens a lot is, say, if you get to a big final and then the people are like, oh, I really want to be up for this game, we'll try one of these caffeine gels. And then they've never tried it before. Their stomach just doesn't react to it. And like, they damn near shit themselves on the pitch. And like, obviously the goal was to go out and was like, right, we really need to perform here. I need every extra edge. But if you haven't trialed something like that, it can go so wrong on the day. So that's where I'd be reluctant to change people's things, especially kind of off the cuff. Whereas pre-season, the off-season is the time when you try to implement those changes. So again, something that's like, in theory, caffeine and sugar gels before the game, it is a good thing. It will give you extra energy. It will help your performance. But if your gut doesn't react to it, or just mentally you don't like changing your thing, the negative effects will be greater than the positive effects.
What about hydration?
Hydration's very important coming through. So you wouldn't necessarily be hugely changing how you'd hydrate in the build up to the game. It would be mainly, not in the day before, kind of the hours before you go out onto the pitch. Obviously we want everyone to kind of make sure they've hit their 2 litres of water for the day so far. So between when they got up, say 9-10 o'clock, and what do we say, 2 o'clock kickoff?
Have to, yeah.
Yeah, you'd want to have that kind of get 2 litres of water in anyway to prepare, especially if it's going to be kind of a warm day. And then that main focus will be intra-game. So during the game, making sure that they have lads getting on with water as often as possible. Because I know we did it with teams here before. And I usually do it with teams a lot in pre-season to just highlight the importance of it. But if you weigh the lads before they go out onto the pitch and then weigh them immediately when they come back in, all that weight loss is going to be through dehydration or water loss.
Yeah, there was like up to like 4 or 5 kilos.
4 or 5 kilos that have lost.
Shane, you would have put on about 4 or 5 kilos just eating gels every time the physio came. He's the only man getting bigger out there. Look at him go.
But so that's again, so we want to reduce that weight loss as much as possible. So it's gonna happen in everybody. So there's no way to completely reduce it entirely, unless maybe sometimes if you're dealing with a goalkeeper or someone who's had a quiet game, they didn't have enough to do. But in something like rugby where everybody's active the whole time, everybody will lose weight through water loss to some degree. You're just trying to keep it to less than kind of 2 kilos. You want, if we're dealing with a 100 kilo person, you'd want 2 to 3 kilos. You wouldn't want to be going above that really. So that is reducible, if that makes sense. There's room for improvement with that.
Hydration the day before a game, is that important?
Not hugely, because you don't want to be kind of stockpiling on water, for lack of a better words. You'd want to make sure they are hydrated, so they want to be getting kind of 3 litres in for the day, but not necessarily overloading on water, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the day before, it's about making sure that they fit in that extra meal, which is carb heavy, so that they're glycogen loading.
The day before, the carbohydrates are going to be the main focus.
The morning of, making sure that they consume, and the day before they obviously consume a moderate amount of fluids. The morning of, they consume
carbohydrates again. So
a heavy carbohydrate or a glutinous breakfast with fluids.
With fluids.
Plenty of fluids. 2 litres of water before the game if they're playing in the middle of the day. Okay. The hour before the game, make sure they're consuming more glycogen so they're keeping those glycogen cells topped up. Okay, so that brings us right to kickoff. Yeah? What goes on then?
Something, actually, sorry, just what we're touching on hydration. So usually you'd want something for that meal, your first meal of the day, and kind of create that morning of. You'd want to keep your salt levels high enough. So not like you don't have to be absolutely covering everything with salt, but you'd want to consume some salt.
Is this when we're having Cocoa Pops?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're having Cocoa Pops. Salted caramel Cocoa Pops. You want to keep your sodium levels high because that's predominantly what you're going to lose through sweat. So I know I've tried with a number of athletes, I use things like salt tabs. So again, it's just getting a high level of salt into the system. But again, it's going to be what you're predominantly losing. So a lot of people will have, again, if you're having isotonic drinks or Dior things like that, you're obviously going to get your salt content through that. But it is important to have a sodium content before you go out on the pitch, just to make sure that you have.
Just down a load of McDonald's fries, yeah. Just down a load of McDonald's fries.
100%.
Okay.
Dipped in the milkshake.
And then what way should we be approaching the intra-game nutrition? So what goes on at either half time or what we can get to the players during the game?
So most important during the game is going to be water. So that's going to be topic one. You want to make sure that the lads have access to water any break in play or any time we can get water onto them. Again, even if they're just sipping away at it. And then in addition to that, things like isotonic drinks or a fast acting carbohydrate drink for those who want it. So again, that's something that might react to people different. Some people's stomachs don't like it, but things like that, or gels, again, stuff that's very high glycemic, so it's very easily digestible. Okay. So usually isotonics, things like Lucozades, Powerades are good because so the research suggests that 6% carbohydrate solution is the optimal dosage that won't affect hydration, and also
during intra.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what like Lucozades, Powerades, that's that 33% longer research was all
right.
based on.
Okay. So Lucozade, Powerades goes off the shelf.
Isotonic drinks.
Yeah. Okay. What about caffeine before?
Yeah, caffeine before is definitely, wouldn't say encouraged, but like there is huge performance effects from caffeine, but again, it's something that can react to people differently. So again, some people all they'll need is like a coffee before a game because they're not habitual coffee addicts like some of us, and then some of them will have, like I've seen props take 2 or 3 scoops of pre-workout.
Okay, so on that point,
Shane's beside you could just call it.
so on that point, so we give caffeine to players when we provide caffeine for players pre-game and then intra-game. And there was one game where we didn't have caffeine with us because we couldn't get it for whatever reason. So one of the players had said to us, will you have caffeine next week or do I need to bring my own? So we're like, no, we'll have caffeine. He's like, okay, well, how much are you going to have? I was like, well, how much do you take? He's like, I get like 500-600 milligrams of caffeine in before the game. Is that a lot?
It is a lot, yeah. But again, is this a big dude?
Yeah,
Huge.
I think for this, so like if you were to break it down, so like I think the recommendation is usually 2 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kg, about 30 to 60 minutes before a match. Or like it'll average out for the majority of the population as anything from 200 to 400 milligrams. But like this chap's like a 120, 130 kg second row. Like
He's heavier than 130, is he?
He's probably, well, he might be going up, like I'm not sure, but like
He's up around 140.
Stockpiling caffeine.
Yeah, he's huge. He's ginormous.
He's a big man. So like 500, like if I was to take 500, I'd probably have a heart attack or something. But like for this chap, it's relative to his body weight. It's probably in around that 2 to 6 milligram. But like still, it's a lot. Like it's serious dosage.
Yeah, it is dependent on the size, obviously, and then also how much caffeine you consume on the daily as well factors into it. So not necessarily for the performance benefits, but just for being able to feel it. Yeah. Like a lot of players are going out, they'll keep doubling the dosage because they're like, I can't feel it. I was like, well, that doesn't mean it's not there. Like, it is still there. It is still having an effect. It's just they don't feel jittery because they're always jittery.
And then quickly after the post game, what should they be consuming?
After the game. So main things they're going to be looking at for post game are going to be, so rehydrate firstly is going to be key. So for, again, when we did that study where we weighed the lads coming off, so for every kilogram body weight you lose through dehydration, you're meant to replace it with 150% of that in water. So if you lost 2 kilos, you'd want to be drinking 3 litres of water to replace that 2 kilos lost. That make sense?
Yeah.
That's what we'd be aiming as a goal. So you're trying to get water into them as quickly as possible. This is science behind it, but as you all know, working with teams, this is damn near impossible. They want to reduce or very much limit the amount of alcohol or caffeine that they have after a game. So, like, obviously that's a ludicrous suggestion in AIL rugby. It's just, it doesn't happen, but in theory...
Try playing junior rugby.
Or as you want to come
just
through.
non-existent in rugby in general.
Yeah, I actually don't. It's definitely not just AIL rugby. It's like just generally rugby, even at top tier professional rugby.
Yeah,
you'll be consuming copious amounts of alcohol straight after.
So there you go. That's
a big win.
Probably the only thing to get them out of the pain that they experienced.
There is that. It's hard to quantify that. Yeah. I don't think they'd be coming back if they didn't get their slab of cans after each game. So in theory, again, for best practice, they should reduce alcohol and caffeine entirely after a game, but again, that's best practice.
Good. Okay. So you've walked us through the full day and a bit of the day before there. It's quite long, so we can't recap every single recommendation we've gone through. Is there anything else you need to include before we finish?
Not actually finished on the day after.
Oh, you're not finished on the day after?
No.
Okay. So quick.
Rehydration is going to come through first, then replenish the glycogen that you've lost. So you want to make sure that you're getting carbohydrates into them as quick as possible. So even though we've carb loaded and we've filled those glycogen reserves, they're going to be gone by the end of the game for 99% of players. So they're going to come through, so they'll have completely depleted their reserves. So you want to make sure that you're refueling that not as quickly as humanly possible. Like, you don't want them firing into as much food as they humanly can now, but you want to be trying to get 1 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight in medium of carbs coming through in the next kind of 2-3 hours, because that's, your body is hypersensitive to glycogen after, so it's quicker, it's easier to replenish them immediately after game than trying to do it gradually over the next few days. So especially if you have a quick turnaround, so they say wouldn't usually happen in rugby, but for football you could have game Friday and then a game again on the Monday or again on the Sunday. So you want to make sure you replenish the glycogen quite quickly. And then the other one would be repair. So they're called the 3 hours of recovery, but repair would be in relation to protein. So you don't necessarily have to increase your protein content, but you want it to be constant to what your normal goals are. So again, it may require that you have a lot of protein just because there's been a large chunk of that day where you haven't eaten at all, and then it wasn't hugely the goal before the game. Does that make sense? So if your goal is 200 grams of protein a day, you still want to be hitting that on a game day. So whether that comes after the game or before the game, it doesn't usually matter, but obviously before the game your focus is still going to be on
200 grams of protein after a game?
No, that was just if that's
for
your
the day.
daily protein.
Oh right, okay. You want to make sure you're hitting
over
that
the course of the day still, like
at a minimum.
So it doesn't have
Okay,
to be right immediately after the game.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, a lot of people you'll see will struggle, don't want to eat after a game. So that's when things like a shake can come in handy. If you even if it's just blended oats and some protein, at least they'll get the kind of hit in first.
Yeah.
And then they can start their drinking.
Very detailed. Pre, intra, and post game nutrition plan. Well done.
So again, just to summarise it up, if you're looking at pre-game, you're going to be mainly focused on what carbohydrates you're going to get in. So you want to try get your carbohydrates in. You want to make sure that your glycogen stores are full before you step out on that pitch, and that you're adequately hydrated. Intra-game hydration is going to be the main goal. So you want to make sure that you're staying hydrated. So you want to get water on as often as possible to the lads and get them to drink, even if they're just sipping away every 5 minutes. It's just one to 2 sips of it. It's making a big difference coming through. And then obviously at halftime, you want to make sure they're taking that on as well. And then anyone who feels like it or has tried it before can have some sort of a carb gel or an isotonic drink as well. But mainly you're focused on water. And then afterwards, you want to be stuck looking at rehydrating, replacing the glycogen that's been lost, and repair by keeping your protein level up or protein intake up.
Good. Nice. Good
and
summary.
copious amounts of caffeine beforehand as well.
Of course.
Don't forget that.
Always.
Yeah.
Cool. Good all the way through, and then nice summary at the end.